Welcome to our podcast, Throw Starfish. The Throw Starfish team is myself, Penny Raven.
Me, Johnny Douglas.
And me, Ruth Amos. In each of the podcasts, we'll be sharing with you thoughts and experiences of subjects that we believe you'll hopefully find something useful to take away or try or explore further for yourself.
Our first episode in the series is a brief yet inspiring story as to why we've picked the name for our podcast. And Penny actually has a personal connection to the Throw Starfish story through one of her friends and mentor, Jenny Munford, a published coach and accomplished businesswoman who helped her in the past.
Yes, that's right. Sadly, Jenny passed away several years ago, but she introduced me to the Starfish Story, as Starfish was the name of her consultancy. And the story is as told by someone called Loren Eisley, who is an acclaimed writer and who's highly regarded for his incredible insight. And essentially, it's about the power within each of us to make a difference, from small, seemingly insignificant and random acts of kindness through to chipping away at what might seem pointless and impossible tasks just because of the size of them.
So, as I'm sure you're wondering, what is the story?
Might be good to read the story out, Ruth.
Yeah, so here's a brief version. The original has been adapted by many a motivational speaker. So this is just quite a generic one, but it's as good as any. Once upon a time, there was a wise man who used to go to the ocean to do his writing. He had the habit of walking on the beach before he began his work. One day, as he was walking along the shore, he looked down the beach and saw a human figure moving like a dancer. He smiled to himself at the thought of someone who had danced to the day, and so he walked faster to catch up. As he got closer, he noticed that the figure was that of a young woman, and that what she was doing was not dancing at all. The young woman was reaching down to the shore, picking up small objects and throwing them into the ocean. He came closer still and called out, "Good morning. May I ask what it is you're doing?" The young woman paused, looked up and replied, "Throwing starfish into the ocean." "I must ask then, why are you throwing starfish into the ocean?" asked the somewhat startled wise man. To this, the young woman replied, "The sun is up and the tide is going out. If I don't throw them in, they'll die." Upon hearing this, the wise man commented, "But young lady, do you not realise there are miles and miles of beach and there are starfish all along every mile? You can't possibly make a difference." At this, the young woman bent down, picked up yet another starfish and threw it into the ocean. As it met the water, she said, "I made a difference to that one."
And this, I guess, is the purpose of the name for our podcast. This idea that changes can be made, but only a little bit at a time. And it's actually the power of small actions that add up over time that start making the big differences. That if you can angle the sail on the ship by 1 degree difference, over time you end up at a very, very different place as if you would carry on going forward normally. And that's the best way in which you can steer a ship onto a very big different course, is by making these small little interventions that matter to just one person at the time, because the only way you can change the world, as far as I believe, is one person at a time. You can't do these things en masse, and change starts from a very, very small point and grows and grows and spreads and spreads.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to throw all of the starfish back in the sea to make a difference, and making a difference to one is better than making a difference to none, I guess.
It's really interesting. I think we go, particularly in business, we're always expected to aim for the biggest market or the biggest this, or how can we get our product out to the most people, and obviously that comes with time. And I think it was really interesting. I was listening to Seth Godin, who took over the Tim Ferriss podcast a few days ago, and he was talking about actually choosing the smallest market, so going in there and seeing what's the smallest market I can make a difference to, and actually that being your focus, and finding that actually through that focus things start to grow. And And I think often we get overwhelmed by this whole idea of trying to, do something on a massive scale. And I think the whole idea of this is that actually you don't have to do that.
I think we also expect that we need to do the big things to make a difference, where actually the smallest acts can make the biggest of differences. And so I reflect on, I was on this youth training scheme in the 80s, and I was working for quite an interesting character, a local entrepreneur named Larry Jacobs, and he said something really, really important to me, and it is where I got my self-belief from. And he just put his hand on my shoulder and he just said, "Penny Raven, don't you ever forget you are high caliber stuff. You can do this." And it was about a task that I'd never done before, that seemed like an impossible thing for me to achieve. But just those words, not only have they stuck with me all my life, but in that moment they inspired me to find a way to do something that I didn't know how to do up until that point.
Yeah, the example that I thought of was a brilliant TED talk by a guy called Drew Dudley. You can look it up on TED. It's a pretty well watched one, and it's described as this idea of everyday leadership or lollipop leadership, lollipop moments, as he explains them. And the story goes, spoiler alert, but it's well worth watching because it's a better version than I'll explain it. But this young lady comes up to him just as he's about to leave the university that he's working at, and basically just thanks him and says, I haven't spoken to you for 4 years, but I just wanted to let you know the massive difference you made in my life." And she goes on to explain this story where she turned up for her first day of uni. She was really nervous, and her parents had basically talked her into going through to registration on the basis that if she didn't feel she was capable of it at any point, that she could just let them know and they'd go home. And that gave her enough confidence to line up in the queue to go and register. And it got to the point where she just got too nervous and too overwhelmed. And just as she went to turn to her parents to say that she didn't think she was capable of it and it was just too much and she wanted to go home, Drew walked up in this really silly hat with this bucket of lollipops, and he walked straight up to the person stood next to her and gave this lollipop to the guy standing next to her and said, "You need to give this lollipop to the beautiful woman stood next to you." And this guy takes the lollipop from him and, without looking at her at all, just extends his arm out at full length to pass it in her direction and turns beet red at the same time. And just as he does this, Drew turns to the young lady's parents and says, "Look at that. First day here at uni, and look, she's already taking candy from a stranger." And everyone literally just dropped out of laughter, normal reality, laughing in every direction. And she says that gave her the confidence in the moment to go through with it, and she felt comfortable and she knew she could do it, and that she hadn't spoken to him for 4 years, but she just wanted to let him know that had made a really big difference in her life. And she turns to walk away from him, and she gets about 10 feet away, and she turns around and she says, "And you should probably know I'm still dating that guy 4 years later." And then he goes on to tell this story whereby 2 years later he actually gets an invitation to their wedding. And the idea is that, as he goes on to talk about it, he explains that he actually has no recollection of that memory whatsoever. Like, he searched his memory banks because it's a wonderful story and it's the thing that's made something so important and a difference in someone's life, but he literally doesn't remember it. But it's those tiny little interventions that can make a huge difference to people. And that was his, in effect, throw starfish moment, because that made the difference between someone going to university and not going to university. And that small intervention that he doesn't necessarily remember was actually massively significant to someone else. And the idea of throwing that one starfish back into the sea is that small intervention or that act of kindness at that point in time can actually have a much greater effect than you think it does, because we're not judging it in terms of this huge idea of what is leadership, what is making a difference, how do I change the world. You're just doing the right thing in that moment that matters to someone.
It always amazes me how you can start a chain, like who's to say that if you were to have shared that story with someone that might be like the next Elon Musk or the founder of Greenpeace, or people that go on to do incredible things and make a difference in the world. So in summary, I guess Throwing Starfish, which is our podcast and blog name, It aims to serve as a powerful reminder that we can support other people by encouraging them, by supporting their brand, helping them to reach their potential, and supporting them to be successful, and sometimes, putting our hands in the water when others don't, and reminding us to help our colleagues, friends and strangers who are in trouble or need a helping hand, to haul them out of the water and rescue them. So we'll ask you, what difference have you made today to your business, to your family, your community, or your life, or somebody else?
So until next time, we're going to say goodbye. Say goodbye from me.
Farewell from me.
And goodbye from me. And we hope you enjoy the rest of our series. And if you'd like to send Starfish our way to share with others, get in touch. The links are all below.